always the season of the witch at my house. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney. If you're new here, I talk about books and writing. In the description, I always have links to my newsletters and some of the books I've written. And if you end up liking this video, please subscribe and hang out. Today, we're going to talk about witchy books. I know it's April. I know witchy books are usually reserved for October, but honestly, I read them all year long. And I think there are a lot of good witchy books that also sort of have spring vibes or summer vibes, which is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start by being a really good author and tell you that my book, The Hedge Witch, comes out on May 14th, and it is a witchy story that takes place in May and June. So you get those late spring, early summer vibes while also getting all the magic you could want. It's about a woman named Laurel who lives on an island in the North Atlantic, and she is one of 5 magical sisters. And here's a prophecy that the next 6 months, she and her sisters are all going to find their soulmates, and there's also going to be a lot of hard stuff that happens. And she is a hedge witch, which means she can travel into another realm called the hedge world. And while there, she runs into her soulmate, but she runs into a version of him from a different life, becomes obsessed with him, and tries to track him down in this world. And while doing so, catches the attention of a witch she can't remember, but is out for her blood. So if that sounds good, please order it. It's going to be on Amazon. You'll be able to special order it from indie bookstores and Barnes & Noble and all that stuff. Or you can pre-order the ebook right now. There will be a link in the description. Now, books that I haven't written. If you've been around here for a while, you know that I can't do a witchy book without talking about the Stay a Spell series by Julia Cross, because I absolutely love it. This is about the 6 Savoy sisters. They live in New Orleans and them each finding their love of their life. The first one is Wolf Gone Wild, which is about Evie and Mateo. And Mateo is a werewolf who's been cursed not to be able to shift. And Evie is an expert curse breaker, but she can't quite figure out how to break his curse. Loved this one. Number 2 is Don't Hex and Drive, which is about Isadora and Devraj. And they have the best meet cute I've ever read in a book, because she is riding her bike and he hits her with his car. She is magical, so she is okay, but it is hilarious, and I really liked the beginning of that book. Next is my favorite in the series, which is Witches Get Stitches, which is about Violet and Nico. And Violet's kind of a rough and tumble heroine, and she devises a way to magically tattoo spells onto people. And Nico is a werewolf who used to run with a wild pack, and now it's coming up to catch him. 4th is Always Practice Safe Hex, which is Libby and Gareth. And honestly, this is such a testament to what a good writer Julia Cross is, because this is an enemies/rivals to lovers workplace romance. 2 tropes I usually dislike, and I loved this book. She did such a good job with this book, taking 2 tropes I don't like and making them fantastic. 5th is Resting Witch Face, which is about Jules, the oldest sister, and Ruben, who is a vampire. And this is a second chance romance because they used to be together, and then something happened that made Jules really back off Ruben, and now they're finally getting a chance to be together. And last is Grimm and Barrett, which is about Clara and Henry, and he is a Grimm, she is like a love and sunshine witch, and this is my second favorite book in the series. I really love it. All of these get a little dark, but they're not terribly dark. Just enough darkness to keep you on your toes. They are very spicy. Keep that in mind. Don't recommend this for a book club you're gonna do with your mom and your aunts, or do. I don't know what your familial relationships are like. Okay, my next one I'm recommending is a book series I read a long time ago. So I was trying to remember exactly when I read it, and I read it in 2009, I think. And it's the Drake Sisters series by Christine Feehan. Okay, before anyone pre-orders this or gets it from the library, these books were written in the early mid 2000s, I think around 2005, because I'm pretty sure I started reading them right when the last one came out. There's 7 in the series. So they are very of that time, okay? They're very of that time. Also, these books have a lot of trigger warnings, and you should check them out one by one, because I was trying to remember exactly what they are in each book, and I cannot because it's been too long, but there are some really heavy trigger warnings in these. So make sure you check that out before you start reading them. But I do love them. They have a similar feel to the Savoy sisters. You've got family of sisters. They all have different magical powers, and they each have a soulmate who they're going to meet. I inhaled these when I was in grad school and needed to read something that was not either nonfiction texts about running libraries or middle grade and young adult books. Next, I have a book that's in a series, but you can really read it as a standalone. It's I'll Conjure for You by Cherish Reed. It's the second book in the Beck sisters. I think it's a duology. I don't think there's going to be another book. And you can honestly read the first one, but the second one's more witchy. It's about Helen, who has recently found out that she is like descendant of witches and she has some powers, and she decides to kind of like stretch her powers muscle. And Everett, who has kind of been in love with her for a long time, and he's just moved back to town, and he stumbles upon one of her spells in the woods, and they get sort of like lustfully linked, and it's delicious. Just so you know, they also have to banish a demon, and this book is very scary, like by my standards of scary. So if you normally read horror, you're fine, but you know I don't, and I'm a scaredy cat. So for me, I was like a little bit scared and couldn't read it when my husband wasn't home, but it's a cherished read. So the spice scenes are fantastic and the characters were wonderful. You totally are rooting for them for their HEA the entire time. I just yesterday or the day before finished This Spells Love by Kate Robb. And the witchiness in this is like a little bit odd because our heroine or hero are not witchy. It's the heroine's aunt. So basically what happens is Gemma has this bad breakup with this guy she's dated for 4 years, and she gets really drunk and she's hanging out with her aunt, her sister, and her best friend Dax. And she says, like, I wish I could just never have met Stuart, her ex. And her aunt's like, well, there's a spell for that. And she does it kind of jokingly, but then she wakes up the next morning and it's like she's been living the last 4 years never having met Stuart. But the problem is the night she met Stuart, she also met Dax. So Dax is no longer in her life, and she very quickly realizes that she's actually in love with Dax and like is in this multiverse situation where she has to try to make Dax fall in love with her or just like talk to her. And she has 1 month to do it before she's gonna reverse the spell. This was like pure fun. So I wouldn't say this was like one of the like best witchy romances I've ever read, but it was really fun. The spice scenes were good. I really like Friends to Lovers a lot. I think it's an underutilized trope. So I very much enjoyed that part of it. My last straightforward romance is Blood Moon by Gillian Graves. This is a quick novella about a witch and a vampire who are business rivals, and then they don't know who each other are at a party, and they have like a very steamy hookup, and then she figures out that it's the guy who's like trying to close her bar. And it's very fun and very fast and very spicy. If you want something that's just gonna be like, you need something to read before bed one night, grab this one. Okay, so now we're gonna move out of romance and into more like magical realism and fantasy. So first for magical realism, I have Wayward by Amelia Hart, which is this also is like historical fiction because you have 3 timelines in this. You follow 3 different women from the same bloodline who all have like this weird sort of ability to communicate with birds and insects. And in 2019, you have Kate, and she is on the run from a domestic relationship, like a domestically abusive relationship. And then in the 1940s, you have Violet, and she is a teenager living in like a crumbling estate, and no one will tell her about her mother, and she's can't figure out why. And then in 1619, you have Altha, and she is awaiting her witchcraft trial. And this book was fantastic. I adored it. There are a lot of content warnings in it, most notably for domestic violence, on-page sexual assault, historical abortion, so like not safe abortion, and more. So you should look at it if you think, read them if you think you might need them. But a wonderful magical realism, witchy story to read this spring. If that cover doesn't scream spring, I don't know what does. Next in the magical realism vein, I have Witches by Brenda Lozano. This is a very quick book. This has 2 narrators. You have Feliciana and Zoe. And Zoe's a journalist, and she's interviewing Feliciana about her cousin Paloma, who was recently murdered. And Feliciana is like kind of like a shaman. And her chapters are stream of consciousness. But then you get Zoe's chapters, which are mostly about like her life growing up in Mexico City and like just kind of like what her childhood, teenage years, and early 20s were like. And I loved this story. It was such a great quick read. Like I read it very fast, and it did such a good job with place in terms of both feeling like you're in Mexico City and also feeling you're in the more like rural areas of Mexico where Feliciana lives. This one I would say toes the line of being literary fiction if you want to read something that's like a little bit more, I don't want to say highbrow. I always feel weird saying that. Cerebral. I don't have a copy of this book, but if you love witches and you love magical realism, you should read Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. It's fantastic, and it's about 2 sisters. It has a lot of practical magic vibes in it, but like the book, not the movie. So it's 2 sisters that have very specific powers, and one of them has to do with cooking, and the other one has to do with like making people feel really confident. And it's about the sister who makes people feel confident coming back to town because she's had like a bad relationship, and she and her daughter are trying to escape her ex. And it's lovely. It was my first Sarah Addison Allen, and I read it a long time ago. Well, I mean, not that long. Like 2009, which I guess is kind of a long time ago now. Like 15 years. Good God. But I love Sarah Addison Allen, and that was my first one. Next, I have more like straightforward fantasy, and we'll start with The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gorniachek. I'm not exactly sure how to say her last name. I got this on my e-reader, so I don't have a copy of it. I love this book. This is like mythology witchy. So your narrator is Angerboda, who is the troll wife of Loki, and you follow her for like thousands of years. Like what her life is like, and what it's like before Loki, and what it's like being married to Loki, and what it's like having children with Loki, and what it's like through Ragnarok. And it was really, really good. And I will caution you, if you're going to read this, the first like 50 pages were very slow because I was reading it like, I don't know if I'm going to like this book. And then I ended up bawling at the end because I loved it so much. And I read the last like 200 pages in like a night because it was so good I couldn't put it down. But so know that going in, that you have to kind of like get through those first 50 pages. Don't falter. Do it. I have 2 books by Adrienne Young, Spells for Forgetting and The Unmaking of June Farrow, which are both witchy. So we'll start with The Unmaking of June Farrow. June Farrow is our main character, and she comes from a long line of women who go insane when they're in their 30s. They start to hallucinate, and then sometimes they just stay insane and then eventually die, and sometimes they disappeared. And her mom disappeared, and her grandma went insane and stayed with her. And it's right after her grandma has died, and she starts to see this red door, and she starts to hear things, and she's like, oh my God, I'm going insane. And she's like working closely with a doctor. And then a family friend approaches her and is like, you have to go through the door. And I don't want to tell you more than that. So she's not like a straightforward witch, but there is some very cool magical stuff going on in this. I love this book. It's more of a quiet fantasy, which the other Adrienne Young is as well. Like, you're not going to read this for like high-paced plot. It's more for like really long character development, but it's beautiful. And it takes place on a flower farm, so it's like totally spring and summer vibes. Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young technically takes place in the fall. I'm just going to talk about it real quick because I was talking about The Unmaking of June Farrow. This is about Saoirse Island, which is on the coast of Washington, and I'm not sure if it's real. I don't think it is. And there are a lot of narrators, but our main narrators are Emery and August, and they were in love in high school. And then something really big happened, and August abandoned Emery and left the island, and they'd always talked about leaving together. And now August's mother has died and is asked to spread her ashes on the island, so he comes back. And this is very cool because everyone on the island is kind of magical. It's more like the island is magical than specific people are magical. And there's a lot of big secrets that have been kept in the town, specifically having to do with the death of one of August and Emery's friends the night that August left. So that's a fun one if you don't care that it's October in the book. My last fantasy is Inkblood Sister Scribe by Emma Torres. And this is cool magic, like very different magic than you usually read because it's all book adjacent, which obviously as a librarian I really enjoy. So you have 3 narrators in this. 2 of them are sisters, Esther and Johanna, and one of them is this young man named Nicholas. I always have a hard time calling someone in their 20s like a man, but he's a man. And Esther and Johanna are half sisters, and Esther like moves around constantly, and when the book begins she's in Antarctica, and Johanna guards the books in their family home, which are magical. And Esther decides to throw caution to the wind at the beginning of the book and not move. She's supposed to move, I think it's every 2 years. She can't stay anywhere longer than 2 years. And she decides to hang out, and then some like really bad stuff starts happening. This was a good book. I did struggle a little bit with, I loved Esther's narration, and I really liked Joanna's narration, and then Nicholas's narration fell a little flat for me. He lives in London, and eventually the 3 of them all go on an adventure together. If you want a witchy book that's very different from other witchy books, I would really recommend Inkblood Sister Scribe because the magic system seems so like refreshingly new. And lastly, I just wanted to show you some of the books I read to prepare for writing my witch series. And I actually read a lot of these a very long time ago because I wrote a witch series before this one that's coming out under a different pen name. That's awful, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, mainly because I wrote them before I knew how to do anything, so they're not even like formatted correctly, so you shouldn't waste your money on them. But these are Ellen Dugan's books, and so there's a lot of them. Just really quickly, this is the Autumn Equinox, so it's an entire book about the equinox. A Garden Which is Herbal, which is all about herb magic. My favorite, Cottage witchery. Not gonna lie, the idea of having cottage witches came from the title of this. I was like, oh, what if someone was actually just like a cottage witch, which is part of the hedge witch? I'm speaking to you like you've already read the hedge witch. Cottage witchery is part of the hedge witch. Garden witchery, also another fun one. Seasons of witchery, I love this. This goes through each of the holidays and what they're important for. And lastly, natural witchery, which is about like visions and intuition and all that stuff. So those were very fun, and if you are thinking about writing a witchy book series, I would recommend grabbing them and brushing up on witchery. So that is my very long list of witchy books you can read this spring and summer, and I hope some of them sounded good. If you have more that you love, please put them in the comments. I'm always looking for some new witchy reads at all times, and obviously this is not an exhaustive list of all the witchy books I've read. I tried to stick with spring vibes and stuff I haven't talked about before. If you've made it this far and you don't want to write words, give me a witchy emoji down there. Give me either a sparkle or the witch emoji or a crescent moon or some flowers or something like that. If you want to know more about my book, The Hedge Witch, please ask a question in the comments. I love talking about it, obviously. I'm filming this literally right now as the eclipse is beginning, which feels very magical. And the book is coming out in, I think, 37 days, which feels very soon. So I'm very excited and a little bit nervous. As always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.